This is your main man RJ from the Ringside Rant, heard only on the Visionaries Wrestling Network. So go over and subscribe across all your major platforms, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher to hear every great interview I have every Monday on the Visionaries Wrestling Network. Go over and follow the show's page on Twitter @_Ringside Rant. Follow the network's page @BizWrestleNet. And, as always, embrace the vision.
Hello, friends. This is Spencer Love, your host of Over the Top Rope on the Win Column Sports Network. Don't forget you can head to wincolumnsports.ca for all of your previews, reviews, and breaking news from the world of wrestling, be it your major promotions or from the great province of Alberta, Canada.
If you like podcasts and you are listening to them on Backbreaker Media, then you should listen to me, Chris Parrish,
and myself, Manoia,
and the Sounds of Struggle, because we are literally the most entertaining duo you'll ever come across in Western Canadian wrestling, baby.
We talk about things like wrestling
and other sports we like.
Wrestling.
But we won't talk about other sports that we don't like, because it's not that kind of podcast.
Like wrestling.
I mean, we like hockey.
And wrestling.
And we like football.
And wrestling.
And we also like to drink beer.
While wrestling.
Well, not while wrestling, but while watching wrestling.
Yes.
Yeah. If you want to get into a conversation with Maniac and Chris Parrish, then you need to tune into the Sounds of Struggle live on Backbreaker Media.
Every Thursday.
Is when we hope to drop, but sometimes Mike Malawany doesn't do his job right.
Or we're too drunk to forget.
Yeah, that happens too.
Yeah.
He can bleep out the swear word, because we weren't supposed to do that.
Oh,
but
I'll try not to swear. I can't do it.
Yeah. Let's face it, the two of us, we're real.
And spectacular.
And we're a little bit of all right.
Yeah.
We're also strugglicious.
That we are.
That was kind of the key. We're supposed to be strugglicious.
Oh, sorry, I'm drunk.
Yeah. So, if you don't want to listen to us, then no. You're stupid, because we're entertaining. And if you want to listen to us, then, come listen to us on Backbreaker Media.
Yeah.
Later,
he said.
Later, bitches.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I got my eye on the three of you guys. You pull one thing, you're out of this game. Now I run a clean game here. I have any trouble, I'll suspend you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 96 of the Blown Calls Show here on Backbreaker Media. My name is Mike Maloney, aka Mike the Ref, senior engineer here at Backbreaker Media. It's a special show when you're bringing out a Blown Calls show, because I don't do these that often anymore. And this one, I have a very special guest coming up from the Two Baked Hams podcast. I have Jonah Kondro. We're going to be talking about being a casual fan, also promos and what casual fans are looking for in promos. Just a little different take. I didn't want to have all us super knowledgeable fans always getting involved. I want experience from somebody who's just getting into wrestling and isn't necessarily considered a hardcore fan per se. But it is August 29, 2018, and there's been a lot of action going on here. Two great shows over the last weekend, including the PWA Retribution show with a 15-man gauntlet match with Gabriel, I'm sounding like the Sheik, with Gabriel the Omen winning that, taking on the Sheik, and unfortunately coming up short. But then also in the CWC, you had what I personally consider one of the matches of the year in Alberta wrestling, and that is Pride versus Dylan Stone for the Alberta Championship. Now, Stone got defeated in the end with a victory roll by Pride, but neither one of these guys can turn their head about this match. It was about 25 minutes of absolute phenomenal action. If you guys get a chance, make sure you check it out on demand. It's going to be up on demand, and if there's enough people asking for it, and I just don't mean the wrestlers in the back, if there's enough fans contacting me, asking me about it, I will find a way to get it up for everybody to see it, because this is a match everybody definitely needs to see. But in other news coming out this week, first of all, in Front Row Mafia news, the first couple of PWA, or the first couple of the Front Row Mafia, Ryan and Amanda, have announced their engagement this past Saturday. Congratulations to both of them. I could just imagine the wedding getting crazy with those two. And then in wrestling news, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated 500 was released today. The PWI 500, top 500 wrestlers in the world according to their magazine. It's been highly valued for years. There were 4 Alberta wrestlers that were included in the PWI 500. Showdown Tyler James from Monster Pro Wrestling, number 481. The Lion Warrior Bobby Sharp out of PWA at 489. Chris Parrish from Monster Pro Wrestling and the Canadian Wrestling Coalition, number 493, up for 2 spots from last year. And also the All-American Steve Rivers from Monster Pro Wrestling and Pure Power Wrestling in at 496. I'm glad to see that we got 4 names from Alberta Promotions and 3 specifically from Monster Pro Wrestling that managed to get onto the list. It just goes to show you that Alberta Wrestling is entering a new level of success that we haven't seen in a very long while here. Make sure you get out to your independent shows and check them out. I'll let you guys know after the interview exactly what's coming up for upcoming events. But I want to get to our main topic this week now, and that is based on fan interaction and drawing in crowds and whatnot. Basically, the inspiration for this episode came to be after SummerSlam, where Becky Lynch turned on Charlotte, and the writers are trying to work it up that Becky Lynch is the bad person in this feud, or the heel, as it may, where Charlotte is the face. And it seems to be completely backfiring thanks to this crowd. Crowds are not letting this get over, including if you watch SmackDown in Toronto, which would have been yesterday at the time of this recording. You see that this crowd is having none of having Becky Lynch be the bad person in this situation. And in many respects, I don't blame them. When it comes to WWE right now, they're really in a precipice of trying to please the overly smart fans and trying to bring in new fans. It's a real dichotomy of actually what you're looking for in terms of trying to generate revenue for your company. One thing a lot of people don't realize is when it comes to wrestling, the diehard fans, while they're an important part of the group, they aren't as much a target group as they are just, I think in many ways the best way to put it is, it's a given that they're going to be there. As much as people complain, ridicule, get on social media, make their comments about WWE and their booking power, dealing with things like Roman Reigns and John Cena, the way he's been, and everybody wants things to go their way. in all honesty, I do believe that most promotions aren't looking to those fans to generate any kind of storyline changing or addiction there. These people are looking to get the casual fan, the one that has the $20 budget for the night per person and has the option of going to a movie, going to the theater, to a concert. Their options are way more open than what a diehard wrestling fan is. Wrestling fans typically will go regardless whether it's a good product or a medium product. If it's a horrible product, nobody will show up. But a horrible product in many respects is would have to be extremely terrible for nobody to show up. Because let's face it, everybody's got a different opinion of what goes on when it comes to wrestling. I like a certain type of story when it comes to wrestling. Some people prefer a lot more flippity-doo action in their matches. There's nothing wrong with either one of our opinions. Just products are tailored to a different kind of fan. And whatever product you're tailoring to, you're looking to get those kind of diehards in there and overly selling for it. But you're also looking for the casual fan to come in, and you're trying to hit your niche product in your area. If you're dealing with an area with a lot of little kids and whatnot, you want to make your product a little family friendly. If you're looking to target your teen, college, middle-aged crowd, you might not want to be so PG or family friendly in a sense. There's a lot of don'ts and do's when it comes to professional wrestling, but there is no right answer. You could see if you are in the Edmonton area and specifically that there are 3 very unique products in the town, well, in the city for that matter, and generating 3 different kinds of products completely for 3 different types of crowds. There's a lot of storyline based, there's a lot of action based, there's a lot of one where mixes both. It's all about what you want to target and what you think is going to bring you in the most casual fans, would be the best way to put it. Like I said, there is no right, there is no wrong. There are a certain couple don'ts that we've gotten into last week, and I think that KJ Cash is going to be covering a little bit on that this week with one of the downs that's happened in wrestling over the past week here. But I want to get to my special guest right now. Now, I've been trying to hook up with Jonah over the last few weeks to set up this podcast. He's wanted to be on quick calls, but he's been having to take care of certain fans and helping out certain wrestlers and whatnot. We just haven't had time to get it together, and we finally got together. It was early last week. We sat down, we talked about what it's like to be a casual wrestling fan, and a lot about what he looks for in promos. He's actually a Bachelor of Arts student at the local university here. So he is knowledgeable in the wrestling product, but he's not overly knowledgeable. And he's one of those target people that people look for when it comes to dealing with wrestling. So I will be back after this interview with the upcoming events. But let's take it to my interview with Jonah Kondro of the Two Baked Hams podcast here on the Blown Call Show on Backbreaker Media.
I've already given you instruction in the dressing room. I expect a tough, clean fight. Protect yourself at all times. And equate you from the challenger. The champion. Let's get it on.
All right, folks. I want to introduce a very special guest here I got on this episode from the Two Baked Hams podcast. Is it Ham 1 or Ham 2 that you're technically defined as?
I am technically defined as Ham 2.
Ham 2?
Yeah, Ham 2.
Jonah Kondro, I want to thank you for joining me here today.
Oh, I appreciate it, Mike. I'm excited to be here.
We have been trying to set this up for how long now?
I think there's been 3 attempts before this one where we actually tried to get together either after a show or at some point, and unfortunately it just hasn't happened yet.
Well, I've been continually trying to get you on the Quick Call show, but it seems like you're Mr. Socialite with, between the podcast and dealing with sponsors and all the great visual work you do now. And
well, I think the times that you've approached me for to come on to Quick Calls, there's been some female that I've needed to entertain post-show. So unfortunately, I just have to execute a little bit of hierarchy, and I need to categorize my priorities.
I was going to say, trust me, I think there's about a million higher priorities, and that's definitely one of them at this point. So, this week we're going to talk about fans, and you've actually admitted that you aren't a long-term fan of wrestling. You just got into it.
Yeah. I'm in my early 30s now. I never grew up watching professional wrestling. It never sort of interested me when I was a kid. When I was a teenager, I had absolutely no interest in watching professional wrestling. When I became an adult, the few times that a friend of mine, Mr. Jack Pride, had wrestled, I had seen one show years and years and years ago. This was long before the CWC came around, and it wasn't really until I moved to Edmonton and really sort of immersed myself in the indie wrestling scene that I sort of officially became a wrestling fan.
Got hooked by it. Well, what brought you into it? Was it just watching Jack Pride, your in arms, or?
Yeah, so that helps. When you know a professional wrestler, it certainly helps to sort of develop that fandom. But one thing that it took me a while to realize is that wrestling fans are, from what I can tell, and this is just my personal opinion, are very loyal to whatever brand that they follow, whether that's the indie scene, whether that's the big stuff that you see on TV with the pay-per-view, the big name wrestlers or anything like that. Wrestlers are very loyal, and they show a lot of dedication. And I sort of find that fascinating because I haven't executed that same level of passion or dedication for the wrestlers that I know or the wrestlers that I enjoy to watch. So there's something intriguing about seeing that and seeing it in a community, whether it's like the indie scene and there's just a few hundred people watching a match, or whether you see the shot of the crowd on a pay-per-view event. And I think it sort of astonishes me that this is something that is still filling stadiums. It's still selling probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of pay-per-views when big events come through. And to me, I think there's something that sort of piqued my curiosity. I'm like, I need to know more about this, so I'm going to go to more indie shows and try to figure this out. So
you started going to indie shows. What, like you say, there's something that captures it for people to want to stay in it. In your experience and what you've gone through, taking out the wrestlers, out of the factor, is it just the crowds that keep you coming into it, or what kind of action do you like in the ring when it comes to? That is totally a personal preference here, but
yeah. So the one thing about live indie wrestling shows is it's not just a show and there's an audience. There's a combination of both aspects, and you kind of get this weird sort of mixture of crowd reactions, wrestler reactions, and it reveals as a larger totality. So, just to use kind of a crude examples, like when you go to a movie, you're not going to a movie to experience the crowd, because the crowd's going to be pretty placid watching a movie, right? You're there strictly for the content or whatever you're watching.
Whatever they're providing, yeah.
Right. I guess what I could say is if there's a difference in attending a hockey game versus watching a hockey game on television, and there's something about just attending an indie wrestling show that's sort of, it's on a smaller scale, obviously, but there's that sort of feeling that you get.
And also you get those certain fans that just, you look at them and you're like, what the heck are they doing? Like, there's a lot of that, but you love the passion.
Yeah, and you can see that, and it's not like I'm there just strictly watching the crowd, because I'm just as big of an audience member as anyone else watching these shows. But I certainly leave with a lot of unanswered questions, then answered questions, when I see the enthusiasm, when I see the energy, when I see just sort of the raw emotion that, is brought out of these people,
simply by an athletic performance.
Exactly, absolutely. So,
is there any particular type of wrestling that you're a fan of? Is it more the high flying? Is it more the technical style? Or is it just whatever matchups look most appealing to you?
Well, I don't really know. I know very little of the technical aspects of professional wrestling, so I would never be able to call a wrestling match. I don't really understand what's going on a lot of the time, so I sort of appeal to the high flying stuff, the pageantry, when guys are getting up onto the top rope, sort of like the cliche stuff that would probably, assumedly, pull a fan in, right? So when guys are doing lots of rope work, or there's something sort of quick sort of happening in the corner, that sort of stuff I like to see, because you can, without knowing what's going on in a particular move or a particular setup, you can appreciate that what the wrestlers are doing is difficult and it looks good once it's executed.
Absolutely. And then from there you can start developing into a point where, he's doing this because of this and whatnot. That's sort of I would say more of a, not second level, but something that develops once you start understanding what's going on in a certain situation.
Well, absolutely. And now that I've been to well over a dozen indie wrestling shows over the last couple of years, now I'm starting to see that there's certain things that are executed because they may or may not push a story forward, or the wrestlers are attempting to do something to elicit a certain reaction out of the crowd or out of their fellow wrestlers, whomever they may be against or with. And so I think it's interesting that, and this is something that is only drawing me further into this wild world, is there is way more technique, thought, and execution going into these matches, and it's not just two dudes or two chicks or, a triple threat of guys just like hitting each other over the head with chairs. Like, this is something that is like incredibly thought out, and that's something that you can start to see as a fan sitting in the crowd.
Basically, once you give it a chance, you can really start to see those who have trained their craft and those that just show up on a given weekend for the most part.
Yeah, and absolutely. I'm glad you said that, Mike, because, you see that in the indie scene. You can see that there's guys that just show up. But the majority of the wrestlers that I've watched wrestle, you can tell that they are putting in the time at the gym. They're putting in the time in the locker room. They're putting in the time with their managers and whomever else is involved with the show, so that whatever they intend to do or not intend to do, or whatever's occurring in the show, that it's going to be done to the best of their abilities. And that's something that, as someone who has no idea how to professional wrestle, or who has no idea how to do any sort of wrestling for that matter, I can appreciate that.
And you've never thought about getting into the ring or anything like that? You're just out to appreciate the product for them.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Don't worry.
I think I got something here.
No, this is not going to be a big reveal. I was actually chatting with a good friend of mine a couple of days ago, and we were talking about professional wrestling, just sort of quite generally, and he asked me the same question. And I said, I have daydreamed about it, like I've daydreamed about a lot of stuff, and I've sort of, created a thought experiment in my own head. I'm like, what would it look like if I were to do this? Because I like to think that I'm in shape and maybe with proper training could do something like that. But on the flip side, I'm like, that's not my area. I understand that I'm coming to this late, and there's no way that I will be able to catch up with just being a fan and the amount of wrestling that these indie wrestlers would have had to consume before they got to this point in their indie careers. And I guess what I'm saying is like, I would be trying to learn how to run before I knew how to walk, if I ever decided to get into the ring. So there's no fear here. I'm going to remain a fan probably indefinitely.
Well, that's actually something that a lot of us appreciate as as wrestlers and as wrestling fans, that one thing that happens a lot these days is where the fans try to become part of the show, where fans start cheering, trying to, more than just trying to carry on the action, more to solicit a reaction based on what they do. Do you have any thoughts on... I know you've seen that at a couple of the local indie shows here, but...
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem like there's some audience members that want to become more involved with the show than would be necessary, than would be appropriate for an audience member. And I'm going to tell you a bit of a story here, Mike. So,
by all means.
I was at a Monster Pro Wrestling show, and this is going back probably a year. And I was sitting right up against the barrier, and I was watching one of my favorite heels wrestle, Dynamic Dean Richter.
Ah, yes.
And I can't recall exactly what had happened, but the action had fallen out of the ring, and Dynamic Dean Richter was sort of thrown into the corner of the barricades of the fence, and I sort of reacted.
Ah, yes.
And I may or may not have thrown my arm around Dean Richter's neck. So that is an absolute no-no, and I definitely got the finger waved at me by security personnel and by the wrestlers that you don't do that. And so I had overstepped my position as a fan, as an audience member, and I know that, and since then I've checked myself.
I think that was the night where if everybody didn't know exactly who you were in the crowd, you probably would have been escorted out and then some. Yeah,
so it's only because I've interacted with some of the wrestlers with MPW, both, before shows, after shows, just at the level as a fan. And if I was just some nobody off the street, just watching that particular show, I have no doubts that I would have been asked to leave. So, and since then, my behavior has been, almost immaculate.
I don't think "ass" would be the appropriate term there, but so when it comes to even like crowd chants and that.
And this is part of the reason why I like going to indie wrestling shows, is because it's not exactly black and white between fans and the wrestlers. Like, it's very much this sort of symbiotic relationship between both aspects of the show, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as someone who enjoys wrestling, I think it's sort of fun to sort of test boundaries, and then if the wrestlers are good, they'll be able to sort of check their fans, check an audience member. Or sort of keep them in check, I guess is the best way to say it. So I kind of like taking the chance and maybe taking some noise to maybe some excess levels and sort of just feeling out where everyone's at in the show. And I don't do that intentionally. It's not like I go to these shows to try to be as big a shithead as possible without getting kicked out. But, it's sort of something that's interesting to me.
Wait. Hold on here. I'm going to replay this back. This interview would be 3 days ago. It'll be 10 days ago when this podcast comes out. I do recall you and certain friends of yours. Give a special shout out to them because they were, absolutely lovely and decided to rub my belly one earlier show. But I digress. You had some signs with you for that show.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and we're not trying to stir anything up, are we?
So the fans that I was...
And for the record, we're not PG on here, so...
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so I can sort of speak freely. That's good. So I was with a couple of gals, some friends of mine. They enjoy...
You can name drop if you wish.
Oh, okay. So I was with friends of mine, Brianne and Stephanie. They enjoy coming out to some shows, and they've been to a few shows in Edmonton and a few shows in Red Deer. And Stephanie, she wanted to make some signs. So I encouraged this. So I had nothing to do with the creation of the said signs, but I sort of happily displayed them. And they were all sort of directed at the bad guy Jack Pride. So
yeah, I'm glad we're calling him Jack on this podcast, because if you called him on yours, you might get stabbed and whatnot. But
yeah, he might throw me into a headlock, I think. So.
Yeah, and squeeze your head like a zit probably at this point.
Yeah.
So Now, recently, in talking with some of the guys at RCW, you were sort of... They told me you had a bit of an affinity with... Affinity, sorry. We're not talking about Infinity War here. An affinity with promos or talking segments.
Oh, so this is like another sort of interesting thing that you wouldn't have had direct access to when I was a kid or when I was a teenager or even when I was a young adult, is that now that social media is so ubiquitous in our lives that it's so... Wrestlers are so accessible, and they're accessible through the promos that they do. They're accessible, whether it be Facebook, anything like that. Like, you can reach out and you can talk to these, and you can. And so, one thing that I thoroughly enjoy watching is some of the promos that some of these wrestlers put together, and they're usually directed at sort of setting up the next show. And so that's interesting to me, just as someone who is pursuing an arts degree at the University of Alberta, and I've taken classes on film studies, and I've have done my best to write essays in the smartest way possible about film and different things and different aspects of film. And I wouldn't call myself an expert, but because I've looked at that stuff as I sort of step through my education, when I see things like a 2-minute promo that some local wrestlers are doing, I'm like, this is even more interesting to me. I want to figure out what's going on, and if I can, and I want to be able to assist these guys or gals in making something better. And so when you mentioned, I have assisted some wrestlers in the past, film promos. I don't really have an allegiance to one company or another. So if someone's willing to reach out and say, hey man, what do you think about this? What are your opinions on this? Where do you think we're hitting? Where do you think we're missing? Like, I'm happily to give an opinion on that sort of thing.
Well, it's funny because that's one of the key things here. Like, I think we can honestly consider you one of the quote-unquote casual fans.
Yeah.
That everybody's trying to drive in because you have your diehards. That's approximately 30% of your crew, or in terms of promotion, your fans, it's about 30%. But that 70% is that casual crowd that just gets hooked into it and has a reason to come to the shows. Now, being part of that 70%, and with your experience in film work, what do you think makes a good, let's just say with social media, a good promo video for you?
So I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to creating these videos.
You're not an expert, but at the same time, you're one of the people that they're trying to bring in, so that's...
Yeah, because I can tell, I like to think that I could tell that I know what's working and what doesn't work. And I think there's a certain aesthetic that is a wrestling promo. And that's usually going to be the one shot, the one take. It's going to last anywhere from a minute to 2 minutes long. It's going to be a couple of wrestlers smack talking to each other or doing whatever. So I think in that, like you said with the breakdown of the fans, 30% of the people that are going to come across that 2-minute video on social media are going to watch it from front to back, no questions asked. But it's the other 70% that are going to watch the first 30 seconds, and it's not going to appeal to them because they're a casual fan, and they're just like, well, I'll just see what happens at the next show. So one thing that makes a good promo is, first of all, what's in the frame has to be interesting. And so wrestlers by themselves are generally pretty interesting because they dress ridiculously. Mm-hmm. The next thing that's important is you need good audio, because that one thing that what I think wrestlers are trying to do with a promo is they're trying to move their story forward. So if the audio quality is not good, or there's some quiet moments, that's not going to make for a very strong promo. But it also depends on what that promo is. Is it just two wrestlers smacking each other around, in between shows? Audio quality isn't going to be that big of a deal for that particular promo. But if it's very dialogue driven, then audio is increasingly important. So the other thing too that, just as someone who consumes media and who occasionally creates media, is that we got to be aware of people's attention spans. And 2 minutes is a long time just to sit and look at one thing, especially if that one thing is not changing. And so one thing that may or may not make a good promo is introducing maybe cuts. And it could be something as simple as maybe you cut from, a medium shot to a head shot, and then the dialogue keeps going. And then maybe you cut back to a medium shot of both wrestlers, something along that. Or even if you wanted to get experimental, you could even do a cross cut to something that's completely unrelated, but you make it related to whatever's going on, and that can make that promo interesting. Now, I'm not saying that you got to do that for every promo, because there's sometimes where you sit down and you watch 1 minute and you're like, this is just gold. They got lightning in a bottle, and sometimes that's what they're after, right? So.
Well, I know that personally, we were sitting down at SummerSlam and watching. I was watching you, and you started counting numbers on your hand. I was trying to figure out what you were doing. You're counting the number of cuts in 30 seconds for certain promo spots.
Yeah, so there was two things that I was curious about, and I'll thank you again for inviting me out to come watch SummerSlam a few nights ago.
Make sure you check it out at Beercade, all WWE pay-per-views. Cheap plug right there.
There you go. So I did appreciate the invite, and so there was two things that I was curious about when I was watching the SummerSlam. Is I wanted to know what was occurring for the promos, and I wanted to know how the actual show was being edited. So one thing that I was doing, and you're right, I had my stopwatch out, and I started it, and then I would make a mental note whenever there was a cut and it cut to a different camera. I would throw up a finger, and so I think I did it 2 or 3 times, and I figured out on average during a match. So this is a professional wrestling match on pay-per-view. There's a cut every 3 seconds. That's a lot of editing.
Yep.
So I understand that maybe, and these are like professionals that are doing this editing, and that's not something that's 100% transferable to even people producing wrestling promos at the indie level, right? Mm-hmm. But with that being said, maybe you don't need to do it to that extent, and maybe you can still make something work with maybe half of those. So instead of doing a cut every 3 seconds, you do a cut every 6 seconds, right? Or you just are more cognizant of when you're doing the cut stream. But this is also during a wrestling match. The one thing that I noticed with the promos is that, and I think it sort of set that sort of aesthetic, that sort of like behind the scenes, one shot, one take sort of thing. And keep in mind, like the professional wrestlers that are cutting these promos, like they're the most professional out of all the professional wrestlers.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to think that they know what they're doing. So one thing that I would say would make a good promo at the indie level is if it's not so much what occurs during the promo, it's what's occurring before the promo. And I would probably say, like, maybe just try to think about what you want to say, what you want to accomplish for that promo before that a promo occurs.
Basically, a promo's decided before you even start doing it.
Well,
in many senses, there.
Yeah.
Just make sure you have it set up properly and go into it the right way.
Yeah, and that can be an ambiguous phrase, because what does it mean to have something set up properly, right? Because and we've seen promos where you could tell where it was just everything, all the stars were in line, and something gets cut and it's amazing, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about it, but I mean, if I, and like I said, I'm just a fan, and this is my opinion, but if I could give professional indie wrestlers some advice, is just think about the promo as much as you think about the match, and the promos are only going to be as good as the match. If you're putting in X number of hours thinking about a match, put in X number of hours thinking about a promo. And that might not be feasible because people lead busy lives, but I mean, it's something to think about.
Well, when you're doing it, you gotta make sure that everything you're doing is focused towards your goal, whatever way you're doing it. If you don't have X amount of time to think about the promo, at least when you're going to do the promo, make sure everything that you're doing in that promo is tailored towards the match, because your number one goal of a promo, whether it be on social media or whatnot, is to get people into the building to watch the show. Yeah,
and I think one thing, and this is hard to do, is handing over your creative, whatever your creative idea may be, is if you hand that over to a third party, and that could be a friend, that could be a fellow wrestler, that could be somebody that is not invested in this promo like you and the other wrestler may be, and just get their input on it. And then you can start asking questions like, well, what does that mean if there is this one thing in the scene with us? Does it matter that there's a notebook? Does it matter that we're holding our belts? Does it matter that no one's holding a belt? And so even asking simple questions like that, and then you can sort of, I believe, you can add intentionality into the promo, and then all of a sudden everything that you can see in the scene is going to make sense to whatever that the intention or the direction of the promo is going to take.
Like essentially, we've all talked about the 5 W's when it comes to a promo, like who, what, where, when, why.
Yeah.
But it also has to be tailored to make sense. You're not going to emphasize a why as much if there isn't a why to be developed right now.
Yeah.
If I want you to come in because I'm the champ and you need to come see me, you're not gonna emphasize the why as much because it's not very a strong talking point at that point. So
Sure, absolutely.
Stuff like that. So you got to make sure all your ducks are in a row.
Yeah.
Now, the other question I have for you, and the other area I want to talk about is, since you are one of the largest rising podcasts here in Alberta.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
We're talking about social media.
Yep.
In your opinion, what is the effect on social media in this generation when it comes to climate, popularity, and developing popularity and growth?
You know, my experience with social media, just sort of before it's really a major inception, because both you and I are old enough to remember before it existed, and now we know it as it exists today. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I remember, and this was only a few years ago, is like everyone had a website. I mean, you had to have, if you're a business, you had to have a website. If you were involved somewhere in the community, you had your own personal website. And that sort of like was the precursor to putting your personality online. Now it's overtaken, and this, I'm saying things that may or may not be obvious, but now your personalities are injected into social media. So, and it is no question in my mind that professional wrestlers at the indie level would gravitate to social media because they can sort of foster their professional wrestling characters through social media and through intentional posts and whatnot. Now, this is almost like there's no going back from this. Because even as somebody, just to use that number that you brought up early, as a 70%, one of the casual fans, even just getting basic information about an event, you're going to be able to, whether it's through the Facebook page, a website, through Twitter, through Snap, whatever means, Instagram, you are going to be able to access the personalities that are associated with that event, and then from that, even if you just execute just a little bit of like research, you can sort of like get a sense of the personalities of the people involved in this show. And so I think it's only gonna work to further enhance the experience that you're gonna have at the show, and it's gonna just, you know, even if it's only for like 4 minutes that you're looking up on Facebook when the next Monster Pro Wrestling show is. I mean, you're gonna the posts are gonna get thrown into your face. For better or for worse, and I think it's for better, because now you're going to get a sense of what's occurring, and maybe you don't need to go to every show, but maybe you just need to pop on to a page every once in a while, and you're going to be able to get a little bit of that sort of content.
Well, not only that, but now with the option of video on demand everywhere, and all the wrestling channels available on YouTube and Twitch and all that social media now, there's no excuse to not get out there and look for something that you enjoy.
Oh,
for the most part.
Absolutely.
And the biggest thing, and I think you could speak to this a little bit more, in terms of there's no magic formula, but what is the best way to gravitate fans towards your product? That's the thing.
You know, that's a good question, and it's something that I've learned specifically from watching professional wrestling and professional wrestling promos at the indie level, is that whatever you can do to get eyes on the product, and that's only going to work to benefit whatever your product may be. So it doesn't matter if you're a professional wrestler, it doesn't matter if you're a writer, it doesn't matter if you cut grass, it doesn't matter, whatever it is that you do and whatever it is that you're putting on the social media, as long as you can get eyes on you, whatever people are saying, whether it's good, bad, ugly, it's only going to work to your benefit. And then, but that becomes a little bit scary because then you get criticism that's a little bit too harsh. And you got to be able to have a little bit of a thick skin to sort of turn that to your advantage. And trust me, people go to school and they take degrees in public relations and communications, and they know way more about this than I do. But just something that I can see, that I've learned just so I can enhance my own podcast with my co-host Mike Carlson, is that as long as you can use social media and get eyes on your product, you're doing good. And I do have an example. So early, when we first started the podcast, The Two Baked Hams, and this is something that works for, I imagine it would work for a professional wrestler, is my co-host, he had an idea to do a contest. And he said, what we'll do is we'll just set these parameters, and whoever meets the parameters, whether it's likes and shares, they can win a spot to come on the podcast. Now, I wasn't against bringing on like some random guest or maybe somebody that we're not as familiar with. But I kind of told my co-host, I'm like, that sounds douchey. I'm like, that just sounds a little bit too pretentious, and it sounds like we're getting, you know, it's inflating our egos a little bit here, because we were clearly not even like, just to have the thought of having a contest was just, it sort of made me a little bit mad that my co-host would suggest that. But then a couple days went by, we didn't pull the trigger on it right away. My co-host Mike sort of explained it to me. He's like, look, if we can get eyes on us, even if people think we're douchebags for doing this, it's only going to work better for us. And it took me a while to realize that. And as a result, we ended up bringing on Thaddeus Archer III onto our podcast, who is a wrestling personality in the Edmonton scene.
The RCW general manager, and probably one of the, I would say right now, in terms of social media, one of the biggest names in Edmonton.
Yeah, so I mean, Thaddeus won the Two Baked Hams contest, and as a result, he actually won a spot to be our guest.
And folks, I'll tell you this right now, that is an epic episode you got to check out.
So you can find that episode wherever podcasts are found. I don't want to plug the Two Baked Hams too much, but...
Plug. We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a bit here.
But I guess what I'm saying is we use social media in that one instance, and even though I thought it was going to bring attention to us in a negative light, it actually it shot up our podcast leaps and bounds. And it wasn't so much what we intended to do with having a contest online. It was just like, how are we perceiving our own content? And what sort of perspectives are we kind of using? And then as soon as I kind of got my head around that, I'm like, yes, this is good.
Absolutely. And I can tell you personally from an example on the opposite side, like you said, good, bad, or ugly. It could be any attention is good attention. You know, when people are deserving to be talked about, whether some of it might be negative, some might be positive, but if they're worth talking about, you get it out there. And social media exposure, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, people are going to go check it out. The easiest example we can do on the Alberta scene is the viral video of one Mr. Jeff Jarrett in Calgary here with one of the local promotions. So, you know what? That actually, to me, was one of the incidents that changed the tide for that company and basically opened up its bootstraps and said, look, we got to get serious now. And ever since then, the product has gotten better to the point where we're back covering them on our network. So,
and you know, it's one thing, especially at the indie wrestling level, is, and I'm just sort of like making assumptions here, but the sort of numbers and the sort of metrics that one would get from monitoring the social media of a particular page or a particular brand is still pretty manageable. That you don't need algorithms to tell you what's going on, right?
No.
And so one thing with social media is you're going to get immediate results. Now, whether that means you get 50 likes on a post, whether that means you get 1 like on a post, you're going to know right away. But you're also going to know, and you know, we've all looked at our phones, you know, just and thinking that there's like a ghost, you know, but there's actually nothing going on. I can't remember. There's actually a psychological term for that. When you just look at your phone randomly thinking that somebody had sent you a message, but nobody sent you anything.
Oh, yeah.
Anyways, that's even worse, because when you throw up a post and all of a sudden your phone isn't lighting up, then you can be like, whoa, what's going on with this post? You know, because you don't know what's going on on the other end. Like, you can make assumptions to how people feel about a post or what they may or may not be thinking, but
until you actually see it, it doesn't mean anything, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing that professional wrestlers at shows that I have attended, they'll ask me straight up, what do you think of the show? Because they want that feedback, because they don't know otherwise, right? That's one thing that we do on the podcast, the Two Baked Hams. We're like, hey, leave a comment, and even on Backbreaker, right? Leave a comment, like it, and then it at least gives the creator some sort of feedback to make adjustments to the brand, to the product, to future content, right?
Absolutely. I know that personally, I've had wrestlers come up to me, ask me what I thought of the show as a fan, and vice versa. I've asked them what their feedback was on what I've said, and in terms of our Quick Calls review show, same thing. Everybody just, if you don't say anything, nothing will change.
Yeah, right.
That's the biggest thing right now.
Yeah, and I mean, like, for the 70% of fans that are casual fans that may or may not go to every show or may not intend to go to every show, but when they do go, they have a good time. That's one thing that's probably the hardest population of followers to kind of reach out to, because sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not, and if as a promoter you don't know why they're not showing up, you can't make adjustments to your product. You know what I mean? And then you may or may not get inside your own head to what's working and what's not working, and then that could end up to good things and it can end up to bad things. So one thing that I like to think about when I go see a wrestling show, or whether I watch someone's new promo online, is if I have something good that I can say, I'll send it in a message. And sometimes saying something good is as simple as hitting the like button on a post or hitting the share button, and that's sometimes all it takes. Or even if you just put in like an emoji as a comment, whatever that emoji is expressing, at least that is some form of feedback that whoever made that post can read, right?
And they can interpret it whatever way they need to at the situation.
Yeah. So
if it's an angry face emoji and it was supposed to be an evil promo, then you did your job.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah, right.
The biggest thing you always want, I think the most powerful tool for anybody listening or watching a promo is the share button.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing you can do to help people out is to share stuff and let other people know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, Mike, because the Two Baked Hams, we've recently had an Instagram post that got way more likes than we had expected. And so it's interesting for us because now we have enough episodes out that we can sort of tell when something's hitting and when something's missing just based off how it's being consumed. But this particular post, for whatever reason, within a matter of a few hours, had over 125 likes. Now, for us, that's a huge accomplishment, because that means whatever that post consisted of, it was hitting with people who were on Instagram specifically, and it was doing something right, and it was giving us valuable feedback because people were liking that post. So now it's our job to figure out whatever that was, because there was only, I think, out of like 100, it's probably even more likes now on that particular post. But now it's a matter of, okay, what do people like about this?
What's different on this post than on all the others?
So that's sort of the big question that now, as someone who's creating, now we got to figure that out, right? So
absolutely. So we've been talking about Two Baked Hams.
Yeah.
Like I said, one of the podcasts that I just absolutely adore. If you just need a time to sit back and laugh.
Oh, thank you.
It definitely is. Let the people here. We're going to wrap this up here, but let people know what Two Baked Hams is all about.
So it's we've definitely been on the vein of wrestling, and the pilot episode of Two Baked Hams was immediately the day after a bar show in Edmonton, and that's when a few of the wrestlers that I know, they were actually wrestling at Knoxville's Tavern, and that's a place that I actually used to work at. So immediately I was like, what is going on here? And it just so coincided that we had finally gotten together the equipment, my co-host and I, to do the podcast. And so wrestling sort of, and I owe a lot to wrestling fans that have listened and commented and continue to enjoy the Two Baked Hams, because without wrestling fans, like the Two Baked Hams podcast, I would say, and I don't want to put words into my co-host's mouth, but without, the indie wrestling scene, the Two Baked Hams would not be as successful as a podcast as it has been. And so I think that sort of gives clues to what that podcast is about. We definitely touch on professional wrestling. We definitely touch on a lot of MMA. We touch on fitness. We touch on just how weird it is to go to the gym. We also touch on...
You touch on touching. That's the one thing
We definitely touch on touching. One of our more popular segments is the masturbatory news, and that's either my co-host or I will stumble across some strange piece of news that involves some sort of like autoerotic situation, and we'll bring it on for a guest to read out. And it's funny because the guest, we never tell the guest when we do that segment, we never tell the guest
anything about it.
And so their reactions are genuine. And a lot of the times, my co-host doesn't even know what we're doing for the masturbatory news, so his reactions are genuine, right? And it's just talking about how ridiculous it is. And that's the whole point, is like we want to entertain, and if we can do it through some crude humor, the Two Baked Hams are going to do it through some crude humor.
Absolutely. Actually, before we get to... I want to plug your next show here, but actually, this doesn't happen on these podcasts, but I got a breaking... I put a little Q&A out to a few fans and friendly family members, see if there was any questions to ask the infamous Jonah here.
Oh, boy.
And...
We've got something coming through the old social media lines.
I was asked to ask you who your favorite wrestler was.
At the indie scene?
Yeah.
Or just in general?
In the indie scene.
Okay, so I sort of enjoy, in the strange way, that tag team. I think they call themselves the Struggle, and I think that's Chris Parrish and Maniac.
You really enjoy those two?
I just, there's this sort of, it's I can't explain it, but I just think that there's something about watching those two interact with each other, watching those interact with whomever they're wrestling, and interact with the fans, that maybe they're not necessarily being nice to me when they do interact with me, but there's something about those two and what they've got going on that just, if I know that they're wrestling, I just automatically put my thumbs up, because I'm like, whatever these boys are doing, the tag struggle, I'm going to enjoy it.
And the fact that they are playing two different characters, Edmonton versus Red Deer,
yeah,
that also is a great dynamic too with them.
Yeah, so just those boys, they're some of my favorite wrestlers, sort of in the Alberta scene. So,
so I was told here, if he doesn't say NV, I'm to mug him. Well, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Yeah, Envy.
Oh, sorry. They're my favorite male wrestlers. I haven't talked about my favorite female wrestlers yet. And of course, obviously, it's Envy is my favorite female wrestler.
Thanks for the bailout there. But, I think you should get the Struggle on the Two Baked Hams here soon.
Well,
that to me, based on the Sounds of Struggle podcast, I think that would be a car crash that everybody would stand to watch.
And I'm okay with saying this because we've already said it on previous Two Baked Hams episodes, but there are loose plans of doing a 4-man orgy podcast. That's a metaphorical orgy, of course.
No, I'm maniac. I don't know how metaphorical it is, but
yeah. So there are plans to get my co-host of the Two Baked Hams, as well as Chris Parrish, and I believe his name he goes by Nick on the Sounds of Struggle. They have their own podcast.
No, it's Maniac.
It's Maniac. Okay, I misspoke. I apologize. But yeah, the Sounds of Struggle meets Two Baked Hams. I don't know what that means, and I don't know what is going to result of that, but
I think we might have earthquakes in Edmonton. To be perfectly honest. That might be some very disastrous moments.
Yeah.
Or some glorious moments. Which it's going to be one or the other, folks.
Yeah, so that is coming down the pipe, and it's just a matter of just getting everyone's schedules in line. And you've heard it on the Two Baked Hams episode. You're hearing it now. this is something that will happen. Just be patient and let us get it all figured out.
So, what do you have coming down the pipe that you know of right now? And you had Stephanie on the last episode?
Yeah, so last week's episode, we had one Miss Stephanie Stitt, and that is a mutual friend of Mike and I, and it's actually probably going to... did she rub your belly? Is that the one who rubbed your belly before? Quite possibly.
Quite possibly, yeah. Things are, hazy at certain shows, but I digress.
Yeah, so anyways, mutual friend. I know her through just attending post-secondary, and so she's an incredibly intelligent woman, and we brought her on for a couple hours on the Two Baked Hams, and we asked her some difficult science questions, because neither myself nor my co-host Mike are very sciencey brained. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that about Mike, but definitely for me, I definitely lean towards the art side. So Steph, on that last week's episode, answered some tough questions about science, and she also did a fantastic job with the masturbatory news. And so I'm going to leave it at that. So if you haven't listened to that...
Folks, check it out. That's what I'm going to say.
And coming down the line, in a matter of days after this podcast comes out, I should say.
This Thursday, right?
This Thursday coming up. Every Thursday at 5, Mike and I drop a new Two Baked Hams episode. And on this particular episode, it's just going to be Mike and I. And those episodes are fun because we just sort of banter back and forth. And we just sort of see where it goes. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And I don't think that... I don't want to give too much away. But I think if you enjoyed Two Baked Hams, if you enjoyed even listening to this podcast... you'll enjoy what Mike and I have coming out on next Thursday.
Absolutely. And if people want to get a hold of you or the podcast, where can they get a hold of you?
It's super easy. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, all of that. It's just at Two Baked Hams, all one word, at twobakedhams@gmail.com if you want to send us an email. If you want to find me I misspoke. If you want to find me particularly on Snapchat, it's Jonah Neck Tattoo, all one word. If you want to get at my co-host, I believe he's Jack Pride on Snapchat, so that's a little weird.
I'm too old to have Snapchat.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're pretty easy, and basically the best if you want Two Baked Hams news, we always put it on Facebook first, and then we kind of spread out from there and hit all the other social media platforms. So just go like, share, comment on the Two Baked Hams Facebook page, and you'll get all of our updates, and you'll have all of the links to whatever you need to do so you can get your hands on our episodes.
You definitely got to go find some way to beat your meat on the Two Baked Hams, folks. But Mr. Jonah Kondro, I want to thank you very much for joining me here this week. It's not too often that I bring out a Blown Calls show, but this definitely is worth it this week.
No, I appreciate, and like I said, I sort of feel bad because we tried at least 2 or 3 times after a show, and then finally I was like, no, we need to make this happen. So.
You know what? In the indie wrestling scene, the best intentions are always there for getting stuff done, but it just keeps getting delayed all the time. It's just a normal thing. So don't worry about it. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, thanks, Mike.
Post-game show is brought to you by... Christ, I can't find it. To hell with it.
That was a great interview I had with Jonah Kondro, Two Baked Hams podcast. Check it out every Thursday, everywhere where podcasts are presented. My preference is iTunes always, but whatever works. They are on the Podbean network as well. If you have the Podbean app, you can look for Two Baked Hams on there as well. Hell of a podcast. Two good guys doing a great show, and completely off the wall sometimes. I get a little grossed at times, but it is definitely an hour to 2 hours of listening delight. But it's time to get on to our upcoming events here. And once again, the upcoming events are sponsored by the Backbreaker Media, a video on demand service. Check out backbreakervod.pivotshare.com for over 130 hours of wrestling entertainment, including Monster Pro Wrestling, the Canadian Wrestling Coalition, Pure Power Wrestling in Alberta, as well as promotions. A brand new Bar Wrestling has come down from California. Folks, if you haven't seen Bar Wrestling before, You definitely should. It's got some of the best talents throughout the world, and they got some of the coolest names for shows. That's one thing I really enjoy about them. One little niche. I believe the last one was called You Just Can't Get Rid of a Bomb, an homage to Batman there in the 1960s. But anyway, let's get into the upcoming shows here. This Saturday, September 1st, we got Monster Pro Wrestling Face Off from the Alberta Avenue Hall in Edmonton. Bell time is 7 o'clock. Make sure you're in your seats early, folks. Our main event for that show is going to be Chris Parrish against the self-proclaimed Martins Pro Wrestling heavyweight champion, Sean Martins. I got a whole bunch of other matches lined up for that show. I'm just about to release details. Make sure you check out Monster Pro Wrestling on Facebook. For people who are listening to the podcast and a little confused, I am currently the acting general manager of Monster Pro Wrestling. So let's just say I have a few irons in the fire that I have to deal with. But from there, our Calgary fans get their first taste of wrestling on September 8th when the Prairie Wrestling Alliance hosts Legacy from the Cedar Brae Community Center in Calgary. Bell time 7:30. Folks, PWA never fails to amaze every show that they have on, so please feel free to check them out. Then we get a little bit of a break, 2 weeks to be exact. But in the meantime, WWE Hell in the Cell will be taking place on the 16th of September on the Sunday. Make sure that anybody in Edmonton, please check us out at Beercade, located on White Ave and 106th Street. I'll be there. I know Spencer Love from Wincalm Sports will be there. I know a bunch of the wrestlers are there as well, including the Omen Gabriel. It is a hell of a good time. No BS, no politics. All the wrestlers that are there are just there to enjoy the WWE products. So make sure you come and check it out and come say hi. I definitely want to talk to a bunch of fans while we're there too. But after that, we have the RCW weekend with RCW Retaliation going on from the Downtown Legion in Calgary. 7:45 start. I'm sure there's going to be some fallout from Heavy Metal stealing the Smith Hart Memorial Tournament trophy from Matt Hart, who won it. And yeah, good old Metal. Yeah. And then on Saturday, September 22nd, RCW Dealer's Choice, 7:45 start from the St. John's Cultural Center in downtown Edmonton. Now, from what I've read on the social medias, General Manager Thaddeus Archer III, who, by the way, has a great YouTube series in the Archer Report, he has stated that matches will be drawn at random and stipulations drawn at random. So who knows what's going to be happening at this show? Could be rather interesting to say the least. And then on that same night, CWC is going to be having their show from Festival Hall in Red Deer. We're just so fresh out of the box. I don't even know what the name is. Last show name I screwed up on the Quick Calls podcast, but I digress at that. But that's going to be a 6:30 start at Festival Hall in Red Deer, and I don't know what's going to happen with the fallout between Chris Parrish, Jude Dawkins, the tag champs. Tag champs actually beat the team of Parrish and Dawkins at the last show, Darkside. But there seemed to be a little bit of respect forming between Parrish and Dawkins. I just shakes my head a little bit when I see it. And then at the end of the show, we had Lumberjack Larry and Wrath going at it, with Dylan Stone making the save. I'm not sure what the heck is going to happen here with this situation. I got to get a hold of Bob Gordon to see how that storyline's being set up here and what matches are going to be coming out of that. And then during Old Edmonton SPN week, now Backbreaker week, September 29th, PWA Fall Fever from the Northgate Lions Senior Center in Edmonton. Folks, from what I've heard, at the end of the last PWA show, the Western Lions turned on Sheik Akbar Shabazz And from what I'm reading on social media, a whole bunch of people are cheering the Sheik on. I'm sorry, maybe that's why it's raining. It might start raining frogs here soon. Cats and dogs living together in harmony and all that craziness. But speaking of Sheik Akbar Shabazz, it's time for me to give out some podcast plugs here. Make sure you check out the Win Column Sports podcast, wherever good podcasts are found. Spencer Love had an interview with current PWA and HIW champion Sheik Akbar Shabazz. Talked about training, talked about the history, talked about all the interesting fans and fandom and growing up in the Alberta wrestling scene. That can be found on Over the Top Rope on the Win Column Sports Network. Of course, I already mentioned, check out the Two Baked Hands podcast coming out Thursday. From what I've been told on social media since the interview that we had, they're going to be actually talking about the match that Pride had with Dylan Stone, his thoughts on the match, and just overall experiences of the show. So that's going to be very interesting to listen to. But also on Thursday, we're going to have the Sounds of Struggle coming up. Chris Parrish, Maniac, they never send me a script or anything, so I'm just going to go with what they send out. I'm sure they're going to have a little bit of fallout on what's happened this week in wrestling. NFL season's about to come up. Maybe talk about the catastrophe known as the Edmonton Eskimos right now. Could be a whole bunch of things. And then, well, I guess they get to end this off with a very special announcement. This week's Double Down podcast with KJ coming out this Friday. I'm not on there, but I think they found a pretty damn good replacement. Not only is she going to be talking with Chris Parrish about women's wrestling in general here, the special guest on this podcast is going to be part one of an interview that KJ had with Pure Power Wrestling, Monster Pro Wrestling, CWC star Angelica. To be honest, I just got the audio in myself, so I'm going through it. From what I've been told, it's about growing up in the wrestling industry, thoughts on the women's divisions, both independently and throughout WWE. But hey, it could be anything, folks. From what I was told, it was girls talking girly things. That's the only message I got from KJ. So make sure you check that out on Friday, because it's definitely going to be interesting, to say the least. And then quick calls coming up on Saturday from the Alberta Avenue Hall. Andre C. is going to be heading that up with the Face-Off show, because Lord knows the general manager is running around and have a bunch of things to do. So I know the Wrestling Mind's going to be on there, and hey, you never know who else is going to join the podcast. So, but I want to thank each and every one of you for checking out this very special episode of the Blown Calls Show. I tell you when I have one next, but I don't really know at this point. Personally, I'm just glad of making content, making sure everything's edited, getting everything up for Evolution and Madness on the Backbreaker Media Network, as well as Powerslam.tv. Don't forget Powerslam.tv. 75 promotions, 2,000 hours of video. The largest independent wrestling network in the world, and only $6 a month. So definitely check that out. But that's going to wrap up episode 96 of the Blown Calls Show here. So just remember, folks, be nice to your referees, because they definitely have a tough job to do. But they will come up with a blown call every once in a while. And this has been the Blown Calls Show here on Backbreaker Media.